I remember the weight of that morning light pressing against my skin as I sat on the edge of the bed I once made with such care. The house felt too quiet, almost hollow, as if it already knew I no longer belonged there. And when I saw the envelope he'd left for me, thin, impersonal, dismissive, I felt something inside me fracture in a way I couldn't hide from myself anymore. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal left you breathless, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. These moments have a way of finding us when we least expect them. As I picked up my single suitcase and stepped into the hallway, I didn't yet understand that this quiet exit was the first step toward a truth that would change everything. I can still feel the weight of that morning in Savannah settling over me like humidity that never lifts. One moment, I was smoothing the quilt on the bed I had tended for more than half my life. The next, I was watching the man I once trusted move through the doorway with a coldness that told me something in my world had already shifted. Nothing was said, but everything was delivered in the way he avoided my eyes, the way he brushed past me as if I were a stranger taking up space in a home I had built around him. That was the moment the betrayal landed, quiet, sharp, and final. For years, my life had been a rhythm of predictable routines, early mornings, steady work, shared plans whispered in the soft glow before sunrise. But that morning, the familiar collapsed. I felt the shock hit first, a kind of stunned stillness in my chest, as if my body refused to register what my mind was beginning to understand. Then came the numbness, a slow spreading emptiness that made each breath feel like effort. I remember sitting on the edge of that bed, my hands resting on the same quilt I once stitched during a winter storm, realizing that devotion had never guaranteed security. The house felt different, colder, larger, as though it had already decided I no longer belonged within its walls. And in that stillness, I finally saw the truth I had been avoiding. He had let go of me long before I allowed myself to notice. As the numbness faded, something steadier began to rise inside me. Not strength yet, just clarity. I knew I couldn't stay in a place that no longer held space for me. And so, with a quiet, deliberate breath, I began to picture the moment I would stand up, gather what was mine, and walk out the door into a life I hadn't planned but suddenly needed to claim. I packed a single suitcase because anything more felt like pretending I still had a place in that house. I moved quietly through the rooms, touching nothing, taking only what I needed to survive the next few days. On the kitchen counter sat a small check he had left for me. No note, no explanation, just a number meant to push me out the door. Holding it, I felt the sting of being dismissed, as if the years I poured into that life had been reduced to a transaction. I left without farewells, not to Adam, not to anyone. I told myself it was easier that way, but the truth was I couldn't bear the thought of being met with indifference. Walking down the driveway, I felt strangely invisible, like a shadow slipping out of a story that no longer needed me. The drive to Jacksonville blurred past. By the time I reached my sister's home, I was already shrinking inside myself. Her eyes said everything before she even spoke. Pity, judgment, confusion. I felt like a burden the moment I stepped through the door. I kept my shoulders small, my voice soft, trying not to take up space while carrying a heartbreak that felt too heavy to name. But underneath the humiliation, something new began to stir. A quiet anger, not loud or sharp, just the early awareness that I had allowed myself to disappear for too long. And as I lay on her lumpy guest bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt the truth settle in. I had nowhere else to go, and nothing left to fall back on. Whatever came next, I would have to build from the ground up. The lowest point wasn't a single moment. It was the string of sleepless nights in that spare room, lying stiff on a mattress that sagged in the middle, listening to the house settle while I tried to understand who I was without the life I had just lost. I felt hollow, like my identity had been scraped clean. Every morning, I forced myself to move through a house where judgment lived in the walls. My sister tried to hide her discomfort, but her husband didn't bother. His sighs, his raised eyebrows, the way he paused before answering me, all of it pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. One morning, after another night staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. Not if I wanted to feel human again. I wrote a small thank you note, tucked it on the kitchen counter, and left before anyone woke. I didn't have a plan, just a need to reclaim even the smallest piece of myself. In St. Augustine, I walked into a small library and asked if they needed help. They did. Part-time shelving, a modest wage, quiet corners where no one expected anything from me. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt peaceful instead of punishing. Being invisible there gave me space to steady myself, and somewhere in that quiet, a sharper awareness began to rise, an instinct telling me that my past wasn't done with me yet, and neither was I done with it. The storage unit felt colder than usual that evening, the kind of cold that settles into your elbows and makes every movement feel heavier. I told myself I was only there to sort through old boxes, to clear space, to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't drift back to everything I had lost. I dug through stacks of fading folders, brittle files from years of living a life that no longer felt like it belonged to me. Most of it was ordinary: tax papers, appliance manuals, receipts from vacations that now felt like fiction. I kept moving, numb, almost mechanical. Then my hand brushed against a thick envelope wedged between two binders. I pulled it out without thinking. The moment I saw the county seal, something inside me tightened. Asheville, my father's land. Land that was supposed to stay in my family. My breath stalled as I slid the deed into the light. There, on the bottom corner, sat a signature that was supposed to be mine. But it wasn't. I know my own hand. I know the angle of my cursive, the way I loop certain letters. This was a stranger wearing my name. For a moment, the room tipped. A wave of nausea moved through me so quickly I had to steady myself against a plastic bin. I remembered vague flashes, years earlier, him handing me a stack of routine forms, urging me to sign quickly before he rushed off to another meeting. I hadn't questioned it. I trusted him. I let love dull my instincts. Staring at that forged signature, something inside me went unnervingly still. All the confusion, the heartbreak, the humiliation of the past weeks suddenly rearranged themselves into a sharper, crueler truth. This wasn't only emotional betrayal. This was theft, premeditated, calculated, hidden in plain sight. The silence in that storage unit felt different now, no longer empty, but charged. I realized I couldn't look away from this. I couldn't shrink anymore. If he had taken this from me, what else had he buried? I closed the folder, not in fear, but in clarity. Whatever came next, I would uncover every piece of the truth, and I would start by gathering proof. I sat on the floor of my small apartment with piles of documents spread around me like a map of a life I had never fully understood. At first, the mess felt overwhelming. Years of receipts, contracts, bank statements, and handwritten notes I kept out of habit more than intention. But as I began to sort through them, something steadier took hold. I wasn't numb anymore. I was looking for patterns, for the places where his fingerprints pressed too deeply. I bought a used laptop from a pawn shop, the kind with a few scratches on the lid but enough life left in it for what I needed. I spent evenings teaching myself how to search public records, how property transfers were filed, how financial disclosures worked. I moved slowly at first, then faster as the threads began to connect. The forged deed wasn't an isolated act. I found a power of attorney document with a signature that mimicked mine, but missed the subtle curves I always made unconsciously. I found accounts opened in both our names, balances moved without explanation, and my assets quietly leveraged to secure loans I never knew existed. Each discovery landed not with heartbreak, but with clarity, like pieces of a puzzle finally snapping into place. By the end of that week, the floor around me looked less like chaos and more like evidence. For the first time in a long while, I felt momentum, controlled, deliberate, entirely my own. And as I stacked the folders into a single, purposeful pile, I knew the next step wasn't something I had to face alone. I drove to Raleigh with the folders buckled into the passenger seat, as if they were something fragile I needed to protect. By the time I reached Caroline's office, my hands were trembling. She greeted me with the same warmth I remembered from our college days, but I could feel a layer of concern beneath it, a quiet awareness that I wasn't there for a social visit. When I spread the documents across her desk, I watched her expression shift from curiosity to a focused seriousness that made my chest tighten. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt truly seen. As she moved from page to page, I could sense her understanding deepening, and with it, my own shame loosening its grip. Hearing her acknowledge the weight of what I'd uncovered didn't break me, it steadied me. I realized then how long I had been carrying the fear of not being believed. She talked through possible legal paths, but I knew in my gut I didn't want a courtroom battle or a public spectacle. I wanted truth to unravel quietly, precisely, in ways he wouldn't see coming. When I left her office, the air felt different. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I had direction, and I knew exactly where to begin. I started the Whisper campaign on a quiet Thursday night, long after the rest of the world felt like it had gone to sleep. I sat at my small kitchen table with a burner laptop, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I created the first anonymous email account. It felt strange, stepping into a version of myself I had never allowed to exist. But there was no fear now, only a steady determination that surprised me with its calm. Sending that first message was like crossing an invisible threshold. I crafted it carefully, attaching a single document, letting the facts speak without embellishment. When I hit send, a pulse of adrenaline moved through me, sharp but clean. I created more accounts, drafted concise summaries, uploaded files, and posted quiet hints on community forums where people whispered about everything from local zoning disputes to questionable business dealings. I sent packets of information to 2 journalists known for digging into financial misconduct, choosing each recipient with surgical precision. With every message, the fear that once defined me thinned. In its place grew a quiet authority, a sense that I was no longer simply reacting to what had been done to me. I was shaping what would come next, within days. I sensed the shift. A coworker mentioned seeing unusual conversations at the clinic. A friend in Savannah said tension was simmering around him, though no one knew why. I heard fragments of speculation drifting through community threads, small ripples moving outward with growing curiosity. Each sign told me the truth was starting to move on its own. And then, one afternoon, I saw a familiar figure standing hesitantly outside my workplace. Someone I never expected to return, especially not with questions in his eyes. I noticed Michael standing outside the clinic before I even recognized his face. There was a hesitation in the way he shifted his weight, a quiet uncertainty that pulled me back to the years when he used to linger in doorways, hoping someone would tell him which direction to grow. Seeing him there after so much silence felt like a small tear opening in a wound I thought had already scarred over. When he finally approached me, I could see the strain behind his eyes. He didn't need to say anything for me to understand he had heard the rumors. That house had always taught its occupants to ignore the truth until it screamed. So for him to come find me meant something inside him was shaking loose. He admitted, in his own halting way, that he didn't know what to believe anymore. I felt the old ache rise in me, but I kept my boundaries firm. I wasn't there to rescue him, and I wasn't going to plead my case. Instead, I gave him 2 things I had kept safe for years: a letter his mother wrote before she passed, and a small childhood photo of him holding her hand. They were simple, quiet truths that didn't need my interpretation. I watched his face change as he held them, confusion folding into grief, then into something sharper, an awareness he couldn't yet name. He left without looking back, but I knew he was no longer the same boy who had arrived at my door all those years ago. A crack had opened inside Richard's world, not from the outside, but from a place he never thought would question him. And I could feel the next ripple forming, carrying the truth toward the one person he never imagined would see it. I first noticed Jenna outside the library one afternoon, pacing near the benches with a kind of brittle agitation that didn't match the polished confidence she once carried. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. She kept her eyes lowered, as if afraid to meet mine, and I felt an unexpected ache. Years ago, she saw me as a shadow to be outrun, not a warning to be heeded. Now she looked like someone searching for a foothold in ground that had quietly given way. Rumors travel fast in small towns, and I could see the weight of them settling across her shoulders. There was a tremor in the way she held her phone, a distractedness that told me she was replaying conversations she once trusted. I realized she had reached the point where disbelief was no longer an option. Suspicion was taking root. Later, through quiet channels, I learned how it unfolded. Jenna had walked into Richard's private study while he was away, drawn by a sense that something wasn't adding up. She found the cabinet he always kept locked. She found the files he never meant for anyone else to see. And as she read through deeds, transfers, and forged authorizations, the truth broke open around her. She understood then that the life she thought she'd built with him was resting on the same kind of lies that once swallowed mine. Her breakdown wasn't loud. It was the quiet, stunned kind that comes when denial finally dissolves. And then she made a choice I never expected. She passed copies of the documents to my lawyer through someone she trusted, keeping her involvement hidden. When I heard, I felt no triumph, Just a steady, solemn understanding that his world had finally begun to crumble from the inside. The first time I saw Richard's name scroll across the evening news, it felt strangely quiet inside me. Reporters spoke about irregular filings, missing funds, and questions from state investigators. I just sat at my kitchen table, listening to the calm hum of the refrigerator, letting the words settle like dust on a floor I had already swept clean in my heart. His world was beginning to tilt, and for the first time in decades, I did not feel myself tilting with it. Within days, investors started backing away. Deals he once bragged about stalled without explanation. Clinics that had carried his name on their brochures suspended operations as auditors walked through their doors. I heard from acquaintances that his board demanded emergency meetings and that the man who once insisted he could fix anything had finally run out of stories to tell. I watched it all unfold from a distance, steady and observant, without the heat of vengeance. I simply recognized the truth rising to the surface. Then Michael appeared again, not shaken this time, but solemn. He handed me the deed to my family's land, restored to my name through channels I had not even known he could reach. I felt the weight of it in my hands, heavier than paper should ever feel. And yet it seemed to settle something inside me that had been unsettled since the day I left Savannah. It was as if my father's voice had finally found its way back to me. As Richard's public image collapsed, I felt no urge to revisit the past or measure what had been taken. Instead, I felt the ground beneath my feet grow steady. I understood that reclamation was not about watching someone else fall. It was about stepping into the space they once overshadowed. And with the deed tucked safely away, I began to imagine what I could build next on soil that was finally mine again, leading me toward the true resolution that waited ahead. When I stepped onto the land for the first time in so many years, I felt the air shift around me. The soil was still damp from a light morning rain, and the old oak near the fence line looked exactly as it had when my father used to rest beneath it. For a moment, grief and gratitude rose together in my chest, a reminder of everything that had been taken and everything I had somehow reclaimed. I walked slowly, letting the weight of the past settle and then dissolve with each step. Standing there, I realized I didn't want this place to remain a monument to loss. I wanted it to become a beginning. So I unlocked the small farmhouse and started clearing rooms, pulling down curtains that had long surrendered to dust, scrubbing countertops, and picturing spaces where women could gather, breathe, and rebuild. I imagined a classroom in the back room, a garden where the weeds now grew wild, and a quiet corner under the oak for anyone who needed a moment to remember their own strength. Word spread faster than I expected. A neighbor brought over a bundle of tools, saying she had extras. A friend from St. Augustine offered paint she never used. One woman stopped by just to say she had heard what happened and that my speaking up had helped her face her own silence. Their kindness settled around me like sunlight breaking through cloud. As I worked, I felt something shift inside me. My story was no longer tethered to Richard or the harm he caused. It was rooted here now, in healing and in possibility. This land wasn't a reminder of what I lost anymore. It was proof of what I survived and what I could build. If you've carried your own story quietly, I hope you'll share a piece of it below. You never know who might find strength in it. In the early morning quiet, I often step outside before the sun lifts itself over the trees. The air feels clean, almost new, and for a moment I just breathe, letting the soft light touch the place that has become my home again. I think about everything I walked through to stand here, and I feel a kind of gratitude that surprises me. None of it was easy, but each heartbreak pushed me toward a purpose I never imagined for myself. When I unlock the door to the refuge center and walk through its rooms, I feel steady. I see the faces of the women who come here carrying their own stories, and I recognize pieces of my past in them, offering them space, safety, and the chance to rebuild feels like stitching something back together inside myself. Healing is not a single moment. It is a long, patient unfolding, and I am still learning to trust its pace. Some mornings, I rest beneath the old oak and let the breeze move through the branches. In that quiet, I feel whole. If you have your own story of loss, survival, or rebuilding, I hope you'll share it in the comments. Your voice might be the light someone else needs.